In an Introduction to Metaphysics by Henri Bergson, Bergson hits on this great point, this great idea that consciousness is more than a concept, consciousness is more than images. And basically what I can extrapolate from this idea, this thesis, this conjecture, is the idea that consciousness is something that is inherently very deep, very meaningful, and something that extends our categories and the things in which the words and definitions that we use to describe what it is. I think that this claim is interesting because usually what you would wonder is why Bergson isn't saying that consciousness is more than the brain, because that is usually where the philosophy of mind tends to go towards, in terms of, especially if you're thinking like Descartes and thinking of dualism. But he actually says instead that Bergson says specifically that it's actually more than concepts and images, which brings the idea of the limitation of images and concepts with how we look at the mind and how we look at our own mind and consciousness in general. And so in this way, Bergson does a good job at describing how our subjective states of being, our mind, our consciousness, seems to transcend any of the categories that we would usually use to describe our mind, to describe our consciousness and the ways in which we think. So this is not to say that consciousness doesn't include concepts, that consciousness doesn't include images, because surely we have images in our mind, for instance, but it's the idea that it transcends such notions and such categories. This is especially interesting because Bergson attacks the notion of concepts, because he definitely has, first off, this very basic idea that there is a common sense view that we should adopt. We shouldn't get carried away by the idealists, and that indeed there is a physical world, a material world in front of us. There is what could be called the real world. And I think that that's an interesting claim. And even deeper with that, he says that the way that philosophers talk about concepts tends to be misleading because it is simply a concept. And so for Bergson to say that consciousness is more than concepts is actually a very deep thing to say, and a very meaningful thing to say, because he's saying that, because he's already in his philosophy pointing out the limits of concepts as such, the limits of which include the inability to understand reality better, what metaphysics is for, the inability to understand what we are talking about, and many inabilities that concepts bring about. And so for him to say that our intelligence and our consciousness is more than mere concepts is actually a really deep thing to say. There's a lot that I could say about Bergson and about his idea of consciousness, but I'll just leave it at that, a little tidbit to think about the ways in which we limit consciousness by thinking about it as a mere concept, rather than as something that is existent, rather than something that exists and something that has meaning and transcends our categories and our concepts. This is Phoenix, and thank you.